Have you ever paused in the middle of your busy life and asked yourself, do I really see the people who serve me every day? A billionaire, a man who once believed money could solve everything, accidentally saw his maid eating alone in the pouring rain. A seemingly small moment, yet it shattered the fortress of pride he had built over the years. Under the relentless downpour, he witnessed something he had never dared to face before: loneliness, endurance, and the quiet dignity of those who go unnoticed. If it were you, what would you do? Walk past as if nothing happened, or stop and allow your heart, for the very first time, to truly see? This story is not just about the awakening of a wealthy man. It's about the choices each of us face between indifference and empathy, between power and humanity. Sometimes, a simple meal in the rain can melt a frozen heart. Join me as we explore the story. Billionaire sees his maid eating in the rain, the moment that awakened a billionaire's heart, and discover how kindness transcends social status, and how change begins with a single honest glance. If you believe that everyone deserves to be seen and respected, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And let's embark on this deeply moving journey together. The rain came down in silver sheets that afternoon, soft at first, then louder, tapping against the glass walls of the Rhodes estate. Seattle's sky looked bruised, heavy, almost tired of holding back the clouds. Inside the mansion, everything was silent. No music, no laughter. Just the low hum of the automated lighting system and the faint echo of a man typing somewhere upstairs. Outside, near the servants' entrance, a woman sat beneath the back awning, holding a small plastic lunchbox on her knees. Her name was Grace Miller. She was 32, hair tied in a loose bun, the rain clinging to the edges of her sleeves. The awning barely covered her shoulders, so drops slid down her neck as she ate. But she didn't move away. She just smiled faintly, as if the cold rain reminded her she was still alive. She unwrapped half of a peanut butter sandwich, the bread already damp, and took a bite. Her movements were quiet, deliberate, like someone afraid of being seen. When the wind shifted, it carried the faint smell of laundry detergent and wet earth. Grace closed her eyes for a moment. This was her 10-minute break, her only pause in a 12-hour day. A black sedan rolled past the corner of the yard, its tires slicing through puddles. A wave of muddy water splashed across her shoes. Grace flinched, then wiped the dirt away with an old towel, her expression steady. She glanced up once toward the mansion, saw no one watching, and went back to eating. But someone was watching. From the third-floor office, Daniel Rhodes stood behind his wide glass window. He had been dictating numbers to an AI assistant when he caught a flicker of movement below. For a reason he couldn't explain, his gaze stayed there. The screen on his desk dimmed. The voice of the AI faded. Through the rain, he saw her, a woman sitting alone, eating in silence, soaked but composed. Oh, he frowned. Was she new? Why would anyone sit out there instead of taking shelter inside the staff lounge? He almost asked his assistant, "Who is that?" But he didn't. He turned away, pretending he hadn't seen anything unusual. Yet something about that image clung to him. The way she folded the sandwich wrapper carefully, saving even the smallest piece of food. The way she kept her back straight, proud, though no one was watching. He felt a strange discomfort, not guilt exactly, but something close to it. Daniel tried to shake it off. He had meetings, deadlines, people waiting on video calls. He wasn't the kind of man who lingered on feelings. Numbers made sense. Human stories only complicated things. Still, that night, When he walked down to the kitchen for coffee, he noticed the wet footprints near the back door. Small steps, light, fading toward the servants' quarters. He paused, staring at them longer than he meant to. The next morning, he caught himself looking out the same window again. No rain this time. The sky clear, bright, the back awning empty. He told himself it didn't matter, but the mind is stubborn. It keeps what the heart refuses to process. 2 days later, Daniel saw her again, mopping the marble hallway near the main staircase. She didn't notice him at first. Her sleeves were rolled up. There was a tiny bandage on her wrist, the kind from a small cut. When she looked up and met his eyes, she froze. He expected fear. Instead, there was calm. "Good morning, Mr. Rhodes," she said, polite, her voice soft. He nodded. That was all. She lowered her gaze and kept cleaning. Something about her composure unsettled him. Most staff avoided his eyes, mumbled apologies for nothing. But this woman didn't shrink, didn't plead. She simply existed quietly, firmly, as if her worth didn't depend on his approval. Later that day, Daniel asked his assistant, Evan Blake, about her. Grace Miller. Evan replied, "Hired last month. Works double shifts. Reliable. Keeps to herself." Daniel only said, and went back to his tablet. But his attention was gone. His mind kept circling back to that moment in the rain. That night, thunder rolled over the bay. Daniel sat alone in his study, lights dim, glass of bourbon untouched. He found himself wondering what kind of life led someone to eat lunch under a storm. Was it necessity or habit? Was it pride he didn't know? He only knew that the image bothered him more than the market downturn flashing across his screen. Outside, the rain began again, heavy, persistent. Daniel walked to the window and looked down. No one there this time, just the empty yard, shimmering with puddles. Still, he imagined the figure sitting there, the quiet resilience of a woman who refused to yield to weather or circumstance. He whispered to himself, almost involuntarily, "Strange, how someone so small can make the world feel less hollow." Then he shut off the lights and stood in the dark, listening to the rain until the sound blended with his heartbeat. The next few mornings in the Rhodes estate carried the kind of silence that didn't feel peaceful. It was the silence of routine, the quiet of people who had learned to move without being seen. Every corner gleamed, every surface reflected light. Yet the air was cold, untouched by warmth or laughter. From the marble floors to the crystal chandeliers, everything was perfect, sterile, controlled, lifeless. Grace arrived before sunrise, like she always did. She entered through the back gate, keying in the code carefully so the metal latch wouldn't make noise. In her small locker, she placed her damp jacket and folded her apron. Inside her bag was a sandwich for lunch, an apple for her daughter, and a folded drawing, a crayon sketch Lily had made of the two of them under a bright sun. Grace carried it with her everywhere, a piece of color in a gray world. At 6 sharp, the staff lined up for inspection. Clara Benson, the head housekeeper, walked past them, clipboard in hand, perfume sharp enough to sting the air. Her heels clicked in measured rhythm, 1, 2, 1, 2, as she scanned faces she didn't really see. When her eyes stopped on Grace, her smile tightened. "Miss Miller," she said, "you missed polishing the stair rail in the west wing yesterday." Grace looked down respectfully. "I did finish it, ma'am, but the cleaner might have streaked. I'll check again." Clara's lips curved into something resembling a smirk. "Be sure that you do. Mr. Rhodes notices everything." She moved on, Satisfied by her small victory, Grace didn't react. She simply turned away and began her rounds again, cloth in hand, patience like armor. Upstairs, Daniel was already in his office. He had slept poorly again. For 2 nights. His dreams had been a blur of rain and quiet faces. He didn't understand why that bothered him. He was used to focus, to shutting out the world. But lately, the silence in his home seemed louder than ever. When Evan entered with the morning report, Daniel was staring at the window again. "Everything on schedule," Evan said. "Your keynote speech draft is ready for review. Also, the Charity Gala Committee wants confirmation on your attendance next Friday." Daniel didn't turn around. "Tell them I'll think about it." Evan hesitated. He knew better than to press, but something in his boss's posture looked weary. "Rough night?" he asked. Daniel gave a faint chuckle. "Do I look like I have nights that aren't?" Evan smiled, half amused, half worried. "You've built an empire, sir. You should let yourself breathe once in a while." Daniel finally turned, eyes sharp but distant. "Breathing's overrated." Evan left soon after, and Daniel found himself pacing. He hated this restless sense that something small, something utterly unimportant, had unbalanced his order. The image of Grace in the rain still drifted through his mind, uninvited. By mid-morning, he went downstairs, unplanned. He told himself he was checking the solar control system that had been installed last week. In truth, he wanted to walk, to feel movement in this mausoleum of wealth. In the main hall, Grace was kneeling, polishing the silver trim along the baseboards. Her movements were steady, rhythmic. She didn't look up. Daniel stopped a few steps away, unnoticed for a moment. He studied the quiet concentration on her face, the way she hummed faintly under her breath an old tune, maybe a lullaby. He cleared his throat. Grace turned, startled. "Oh, Mr. Rhodes, I didn't see you there." He nodded once. "You're working early." Her eyes lifted, calm as ever. "Yes, sir. There's always more dust than time." The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. She didn't mean it as a joke, but somehow it felt like one. "Carry on," he said quietly, and walked away. But the sound of her voice lingered in his head long after. At lunch, the staff gathered in the service kitchen, a narrow space tucked behind the pantry. Grace sat at the far end, unwrapping her sandwich. She always sat near the window, though it barely offered a view, just a strip of grass and the old fence separating the estate from the road. Clara entered with a cup of coffee, her heels sharp against the tile. She looked at Grace's seat, her expression sour. "Miss Miller," she said, her tone too sweet to be kind. "If you have time to stare out windows, perhaps you can take my shift tomorrow evening. I have a social engagement." Grace looked up, surprised but polite. "Yes, ma'am. I can cover it." "Good," Clara said, and turned to the others. "See? That's how it's done. Quiet, obedient, useful." No one spoke. The air turned tight. Grace just lowered her gaze and folded the sandwich wrapper carefully, saving it for later. That evening, after the staff had gone, Daniel returned home later than usual. The house felt heavier, darker. He poured himself coffee and walked through the halls. Every sound echoed the soft hum of the refrigerator, the clock ticking in the dining room, his own footsteps. He paused at the base of the staircase. The silver trim along the baseboard shone like glass. He crouched slightly, noticing how perfectly even it was. Her work, her presence. It was odd, he thought, how the smallest acts of care could linger. He felt something tug at him. Not attraction, not yet empathy, but recognition. He had spent so many years surrounded by people who chased his favor, his wealth, his name. But this woman, she simply worked. She didn't flatter. She didn't fear. She just did what she had to, with quiet dignity. He found himself thinking of his late wife, Amelia, who used to say, "The measure of a person isn't what they earn. It's what they keep doing when no one notices." He hadn't thought of that in years. The memory ached, but in a strange way. It felt cleansing. Downstairs, the rain started again, light at first. He watched it fall through the high windows, thinking of Grace walking home in it. No driver, no umbrella. "Evan," he called through the intercom. "Yes, sir. See that the staff has proper rain gear by next week. Coats, umbrellas, whatever they need." There was a brief pause. Evan's voice came back, a hint of surprise in it. "Of course, sir." Shall I note that as an HR expense, Daniel hesitated. "No," he said finally. "I'll cover it." When he ended the call, he realized how small the gesture was. Still, it felt right. Upstairs, he returned to his desk, but the spreadsheets looked hollow. The rain continued tapping at the windows. In her tiny apartment across town, Grace was folding Lily's clothes, humming softly. The child sat on the couch, coloring, her cheeks round, her hair still damp from the bath. "Mommy," Lily said, holding up her drawing. "That's you at work." Grace smiled. The stick figure stood under a gray cloud, umbrella broken, yet smiling. "And that's the big house," Lily added proudly. "Do they say thank you?" "There," Grace paused, eyes on the paper. She hesitated, then answered gently. "Not always, honey, but that's okay. We don't do things for thank yous, do we?" Lily shook her head, smiling. "We do things because we're good." Grace hugged her close, breathing in the faint smell of baby shampoo and rain. That night, Daniel dreamed again of rain. But this time, he saw not a woman eating alone, but a mother walking home with a child asleep on her shoulder, the rain falling like a curtain around them. He woke with a start, unsure why his chest felt heavy. For the first time in years, he didn't go back to sleep. He sat by the window until morning, watching the world brighten through a mist of silver. Morning light slid through the tall windows of the Rhodes estate, spilling gold over marble and silence. The rain had stopped during the night, leaving behind a world that glistened. Drops clung to the roses along the back path, and the air smelled faintly of sea salt drifting from the bay. Daniel sat in his office, his tie undone, staring at his screen. A dozen new emails blinked across the monitor, each demanding something: a signature, a decision, an appearance. He ignored them. His mind wasn't on business. It hadn't been for days. Across the hall, Evan Blake entered quietly, holding a small tablet. "Sir," he began, "we got the new motion detection report from the security system. The outdoor cameras are recording at higher resolution now. I wanted you to review the test captures." Daniel nodded absently, still staring out the window. "Fine. Leave them." Evan placed the tablet on the desk, hesitated a moment, then added, "You should take a look at the garden feed. The AI picked up something interesting." When he left, Daniel tapped the screen. Rows of thumbnails filled the display: rainy nights, empty hallways, the shimmer of streetlights beyond the fence. Then one image caught his eye: a small figure, crouched near the back steps. The resolution was sharp enough to show strands of hair escaping from a bun, glistening wet. Grace Miller. She was holding a piece of bread in her hand, stretching it toward a stray cat hiding beneath a bench. The cat looked hesitant, paw lifted mid-step. Daniel enlarged the image. It wasn't just the gesture that struck him, it was her face. There was kindness there, unguarded, unperformed, the kind of kindness that had nothing to do with who might be watching. He leaned back in his chair. For a long moment, he simply looked at the screen, the rain, the dim light, the quiet devotion in that one frame. It reminded him of something he hadn't felt in years. He thought of Amelia again, his late wife, who used to rescue stray animals from construction sites near his first office. She had once told him, "We can't fix everything, Daniel, but we can at least be gentle." That memory hit harder than he expected. His jaw tightened. He closed the file and rubbed his temples, but the image burned behind his eyes. Downstairs, Grace was folding linens in the laundry room. Her sleeves were rolled up, the air thick with the smell of detergent. The radio played quietly in the corner, a local station with soft jazz. She hummed along, unaware that a moment of her life had been frozen upstairs in pixels and reflection. When Evan returned later to check in, Daniel asked, "Does she always work that late?" Evan looked puzzled. "Grace." "Yes, sir. Usually until after 9. She volunteers for extra tasks." "Volunteers," Daniel echoed. "Yes. Says she needs the hours." Daniel nodded slowly, more to himself than to Evan. "I see." That evening, he walked through the house after the staff had gone. The hallways gleamed, the smell of polish still faint in the air. He passed the back steps, the same ones from the photo. The bench was empty, but a small saucer sat near its leg, with a few crumbs left inside. He looked down at it for a while, then did something impulsive. He sat. The bench was cold beneath him, damp from the rain. He looked out across the yard, where the trees dripped quietly in the darkness. The silence pressed close, but it didn't feel so heavy anymore. The next morning, he called Evan again. "Remind me to double the maintenance staff's meal allowance," he said casually. Evan blinked. "Meal allowance?" "Yes." "They deserve better than vending machine snacks." "Of course," Evan said, scribbling it down, still surprised. Grace noticed the change 2 days later when the staff kitchen received new supplies, fresh fruit, sandwiches, even small cartons of soup. The younger maids whispered about it, confused but grateful. Clara Benson, however, frowned. "A waste," she muttered under her breath. "They'll just get spoiled." Grace said nothing. She ladled soup into a bowl, her thoughts far away. That evening, as she wiped the kitchen counters, Daniel passed by. Their eyes met briefly. For a moment, there was an unspoken acknowledgement between them, something quiet and strange, like two people remembering the same rain without saying it aloud. She nodded respectfully. He returned the gesture, almost smiling before catching himself. Later, when the house emptied again, Daniel returned to his office. He opened the photo one more time, the same frame, the same quiet grace. He studied it like a painting. He wondered what made a person like her keep that calm, how she carried herself through exhaustion without bitterness. He wanted to understand it, but when he caught himself thinking too long, he felt foolish. She was an employee, a maid, someone from a world entirely different from his. Why should it matter? He tried to bury the thought, to drown it under spreadsheets and numbers. But something inside him had shifted, subtly, permanently. Meanwhile, across town, Grace was putting Lily to bed. The little girl's cough had grown worse with the damp weather. Grace brushed a hand across her forehead and frowned at the warmth there. "Mommy, are you tired?" Lily asked sleepily. "Not too tired to hear your story," Grace whispered, pulling the blanket closer. Lily smiled. "Then once upon a time." Grace listened, her eyes soft. For a few minutes, the world outside the rain, the work, the long hours fell away. All that remained was the sound of her daughter's voice, fragile and full of light. When Lily finally drifted to sleep, Grace sat by the window. The moonlight touched her hands. She looked at the worn photo of her husband on the dresser, the one taken before the accident. His smile was still bright, frozen in another life. "I'm doing my best," she whispered, "for her, for us." The next morning brought wind instead of rain. Daniel arrived home from a board meeting earlier than usual. As he stepped into the foyer, he heard voices near the service hall. Clara's tone was sharp. "I told you, that rag goes in the disposal bin, not the wash. You'll ruin the machine." Grace's reply was calm. "It's still usable. Ma'am, I just thought—" "You thought Clara's laugh was cutting. You're paid to clean, not to think." Daniel's jaw tightened. He stepped forward before he could reconsider. "That's enough. Clara!" She turned, startled. "Oh, Mr. Rhodes, I didn't see you. We were just training staff." "Yes, I heard," he said evenly. "Try using a different tone next time. This is a home, not a barracks." Clara flushed crimson. "Of course, sir." Grace stood still, uncertain what to do. Daniel met her eyes briefly and said only, "Carry on." Then he walked away, pretending not to notice the gratitude in her expression. When he reached his office, he exhaled slowly. He wasn't sure what had come over him. He never interfered in staff matters. Yet the idea of someone speaking to her that way had stirred something fierce in him, something protective, unfamiliar. He sat back down at his desk, and through the open window, he could hear faint laughter from the garden. One of the younger maids was telling a story. For the first time, the mansion didn't sound entirely empty. That night, Evan stopped by his office before leaving. The system flagged a few new captures. "Sir, do you want me to clear them?" Daniel paused. "Show me first." Evan handed him the tablet. The feed showed the back steps again. The stray cat was there, curled up beneath the bench. Next to it, a new saucer clean, filled with milk. Daniel's lips curved slightly. "Don't delete it." Evan blinked. "Sir, keep it in the archives. Label it Daylight Kindness." Evan hesitated, unsure if he'd heard correctly, then nodded. "Yes, sir." When he left, Daniel leaned back and looked out at the dark yard beyond the window. The world outside felt different lately, less mechanical, less predictable. He didn't know it yet, but the quiet shift inside him had already begun. He no longer just saw Grace Miller as part of the background of his ordered life. He saw her as something else entirely, a reminder that gentleness, even in silence, could leave a mark deeper than ambition ever could. The day began like any other, too quiet, too clean, too still. Sunlight moved slowly through the tall windows of the Rhodes estate, slicing across the marble like golden ribbons. The staff moved carefully, speaking in low tones, aware that Mr. Rhodes disliked noise before noon. Grace arrived early, as she always did. She tied her apron, tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, and started her routine, dusting, folding, polishing, the rhythm almost meditative. She took comfort in the repetition. There was peace in the familiar, even if it wasn't joy. That morning, Clara Benson walked through the east hallway with her usual authority. The keys on her belt jingled with every step. She inspected the rooms with a sharp gaze, her clipboard pressed tight against her chest. To her, the mansion wasn't just a place to work, it was her kingdom. And Grace was the intruder. By late morning, Daniel was preparing for a video call with investors. His schedule was tight, his patience thinner than usual. Evan was setting up his files when Clara entered, pale and breathless. "Mr. Rhodes," she said, clutching the clipboard, "I'm afraid there's been an incident." Daniel didn't look up. "What kind of incident?" "It's your Patek Philippe," she said quickly. "The limited edition. It's missing." He froze. That watch had belonged to his father. A gift before his first business launch. It wasn't just expensive. It was sentimental. "When did you last see it?" he asked. "Yesterday." "Sir." "It was in the glass cabinet in your study." Clara's eyes darted nervously. "Only staff with clearance could have entered. That includes myself, Evan, and Miss Miller." Evan frowned. "Grace, she doesn't even clean the study." "She did yesterday," Clara countered. "I assigned her there while the other maids were off. She was the last one in that room." Daniel's expression hardened. "Bring her in." Moments later, Grace entered, wiping her hands on her apron. Her face was calm, but puzzled by the sudden summons. "Mr. Rhodes." Daniel gestured to the open cabinet. The velvet box sat empty. "My watch is gone. Clara tells me you were here yesterday." Grace looked at the cabinet, then back at him. "Yes, sir." "I dusted the shelves, as instructed." "And did you handle this box?" "I moved it to clean beneath it, but I didn't open it." Clara crossed her arms. "No one else entered the study after you." "Miss Miller, not until this morning." The room went still. The air felt sharp. Grace's voice remained steady. "I didn't take it." Daniel studied her face for any sign of guilt, but all he saw was sincerity. Quiet, unwavering. Still, he'd learned long ago not to trust sincerity. "Until we find out what happened," he said, voice clipped. "I think it's best you take a leave of absence." Grace blinked, stunned. "You think I stole it?" "I think," he replied, "that it's missing, and you were the last person here." For the first time, her composure faltered. She took a small breath, steadying herself. "Mr. Rhodes, I've worked here for almost a year. I've never—" "Please," Clara interrupted, smugness barely hidden. "Let's not make this harder than it needs to be." Grace turned toward her, eyes narrowing slightly. "You're right, ma'am. Hard things don't need help." Clara flushed, but Daniel spoke again, colder this time. "That's enough. You'll be paid through the week. Evan will handle the paperwork." Grace looked at him for a long moment, searching for something in his face, reason, fairness, maybe even kindness. She found none. Her shoulders straightened. "As you wish, sir," she said softly. "But I want you to know I didn't take anything from you." Daniel didn't answer. She left quietly, her steps light, almost soundless. When the door closed behind her, the silence pressed heavy. Evan exhaled slowly. "Sir, I don't think she—" "Not now," Daniel said sharply. "Handle the report." Clara stood at the edge of the room, pretending sympathy. "It's unfortunate, but these things happen. Some people can't help themselves." Daniel dismissed her with a curt nod. "You may go." Once alone, he sat behind his desk, staring at the empty velvet box. The rational part of him said it made sense: probability, access, timing. But something in him resisted the conclusion. He told himself it didn't matter. It was just a watch. But deep down, The loss wasn't just about the object. It was about the trust he hadn't realized he'd started to build. Outside, clouds began to gather again. The rain, it seemed, was never far away in this city. Grace walked out through the side gate, carrying a small bag with her uniform folded neatly inside. As she stepped into the drizzle, she looked back once at the mansion, its tall windows glinting like eyes that refused to blink. She didn't cry. Not yet. The city bus came late, as always. She stood at the stop, her hair damp, her hands trembling only when she finally looked down at her palms still red from cleaning solution. She thought of Lily, waiting at home, drawing another picture. When she reached her apartment, Lily ran to her. "Mommy, you're home early." Grace knelt, forcing a smile. "Yes, sweetheart. Mommy has a little time off." "Did they say thank you?" the girl asked innocently. Grace swallowed. "Not this time. That night, after Lily fell asleep." Grace sat by the window again. The street light flickered outside. She reached for her notebook, the one where she wrote down her expenses: rent, groceries, school supplies. Her pen hovered, then stopped. She whispered to herself, "1 week's pay left. We'll make it." At the mansion, Daniel poured himself a drink he didn't want. The clock on the wall ticked steadily. He looked at the rain sliding down the window and saw her face there again, calm, proud, under the awning. He muttered under his breath, "Why didn't you just say something more?" But he knew she had. He just hadn't listened. Later, Evan returned with the daily logs from the security system. "Sir," he said, "about the footage from yesterday, one of the cameras near the east wing malfunctioned. We're running diagnostics, but the backup drive might still have a copy." Daniel waved him off. "Check it tomorrow." When Evan left, Daniel opened the drawer of his desk and found Grace's handwritten note left behind in the cleaning log. He unfolded it. The handwriting was neat, almost graceful. "Mr. Rhodes, thank you for giving me the chance to work here. I never meant to disappoint you. I hope one day people like me won't be judged before being understood. Respectfully, Grace Miller." He folded the note again, slowly, feeling an ache in his chest. He couldn't explain. Outside, the rain grew heavier, drumming against the glass like an old song he had forgotten the words to. Downstairs, Clara stood in the pantry, whispering on her phone, her voice low, impatient. "Yes, I have it. Stop worrying. No one suspects a thing." She opened her bag, glanced at the glittering gold watch tucked inside a silk handkerchief, and smiled. In another part of the city, Grace sat beside her sleeping daughter, her face lit by the faint glow of a streetlight. She whispered into the dark, "Someday, they'll see the truth." And for the first time in many years, Daniel Rhodes couldn't sleep. The rain outside his window felt heavier, louder, as if echoing the guilt he refused to name. He didn't know it yet, but the story of that missing watch would change everything he thought he knew about justice, trust, and himself. The next morning the house was too quiet, even for the Rhodes estate, the kind of silence that presses on the skin, reminding everyone of something unspoken. Daniel sat at his desk, staring at the open window where mist drifted in from the bay. He had not slept. The rain had ended hours ago, but its rhythm still echoed in his head like an unfinished sentence. The empty space on the shelf where his father's watch used to sit seemed larger than it should have been. He told himself it was only a missing object. Yet every time he glanced that way, he felt something heavier than loss, an unease that refused to leave. When Evan entered with the morning report, Daniel waved him to a seat. "Anything on the camera diagnostics still running?" "Sir, we should have a copy of the backup by tonight." Daniel nodded. "Good." "And the staff quiet," Evan said carefully. "Clara has taken charge. People are uneasy. Some think Miss Miller was treated unfairly." Daniel's gaze shifted toward the window. "Do they?" Evan hesitated. "She had friends here." "Sir, people notice when someone like that disappears." Daniel didn't answer. He lifted his coffee, let it cool untouched, and finally said, "That will be all." When the door closed, the silence returned. Only the sound of the clock kept him company. He tried to bury himself in contracts, proposals, numbers, but each line blurred into the next. His mind betrayed him, pulling him back to the look in Grace Miller's eyes when she said, "I didn't take anything from you." At noon, he walked the corridors. The house smelled faintly of lemon polish, of something too clean. Clara passed him in the hall, her expression all obedience, everything under control. "Mr. Rhodes," she said briskly, "I've arranged replacements for the morning shift." He gave a short nod, though her cheerfulness irritated him. "Good." She hesitated. "If I may say, sir, it's best not to let one bad seed spoil the field." Daniel's eyes flicked to her. "Is that what she was?" "Clara, a bad seed." Clara's smile stiffened. "Well, it would seem so." He studied her a moment longer, then walked away without another word. The back of his neck tingled. That evening he poured himself a drink and sat in the dimness of his study. The bourbon burned, but it didn't warm him. From somewhere deep in the mansion came the soft sound of the cleaning machines starting their automatic cycle. Even they seemed louder now that Grace's quiet footsteps were gone. He opened the drawer and unfolded the note she had left. He read it again. The handwriting was steady, deliberate. "I never meant to disappoint you." He set the paper down, exhaled, and said to the empty room, "Maybe you didn't." Outside, thunder rolled far away. He thought of her child. He had heard Evan mention once that she had a daughter. He wondered if the girl knew what had happened, if she would ask her mother why the world could turn cruel so easily. Sleep came late and left early. By dawn he was pacing. He told himself he only needed closure, some proof to quiet his conscience. He sent Evan a message before sunrise. Check the backup immediately. Hours later, Evan appeared in the doorway holding the tablet. "You'll want to see this." The footage was grainy but clear enough. It showed the hallway outside the study at 9 p.m., long after Grace had clocked out. A figure moved across the frame, small and quick. Clara Benson. She entered the study, stayed 3 minutes, then left, carrying something glinting in her hand. Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. He replayed the clip twice, slower each time. There was no mistake. Evan watched him carefully. "What do you want to do?" "Sir," Daniel closed the tablet. "Nothing yet." "Sir, not until I've spoken to her." He found Clara in the kitchen, instructing 2 maids about silverware placement. She looked up when he entered, all pleasant composure. "Mr. Rhodes," she began. "Everything for dinner is arranged." He cut her off. "Where's my watch?" The room stilled. The younger maids froze, unsure whether to leave. I beg your pardon," she stammered. "You heard me?" His tone was quiet, but sharp enough to make her flinch. "You were in my study after hours. The camera saw you." Her mouth opened, closed. For a second, she seemed to search for the right lie. "I was only checking that the lights were off." "You know how the sensors—" "Don't insult me," he said, stepping closer. Return it." Her composure cracked. "Mr. Rhodes, please. It was a mistake. I only borrowed it. I meant to put it back." He stared at her, disbelief turning to disgust. "Borrowed it." Tears welled in her eyes. "I was desperate. My brother's medical bills. I didn't think you'd notice." Daniel didn't answer. He simply held out his hand. After a long moment, she reached into her pocket, trembling, and placed the watch there. When she tried to speak again, he said quietly, "You may leave before I decide to press charges." Her eyes widened. "Sir, please now." She left in a blur of footsteps. The maid stared, whispering after she was gone. Daniel turned to Evan, who had arrived halfway through. "Handle her termination papers." "Yes, sir." When the door swung shut behind them, Daniel looked down at the watch in his palm. The face gleamed faintly in the light, innocent, polished like nothing had happened. But something had. He felt no relief, only shame. He had doubted the one person in this house who hadn't deserved it. That evening, as the rain returned, he sat alone by the window. The world outside blurred into gray. He thought of Grace walking home that night in the drizzle, holding her child's hand, carrying the weight of his accusation. He whispered to the glass, "I'm sorry." The words vanished into the storm. Evan appeared in the doorway again. "Sir, shall I contact her? Tell her the misunderstanding's been cleared?" Daniel hesitated. "Not yet. I'll speak to her myself." He rose, slipped the watch into his pocket, and headed for the garage. The rain was falling harder now, washing the city clean. He didn't care. He needed to see her face, to say the words properly. The drive into town was slow, the streets slick with water. He found the address in her employee file, a small apartment building near the edge of the industrial district. Lights glowed faintly behind drawn curtains. He parked and sat for a long time, rain drumming on the windshield. What would he even say? "I accused you. I was wrong. Please forgive me." Words seemed too small for what he had done. Finally, he stepped out into the downpour and crossed the street. The hallway smelled of damp carpet and cooking oil. He knocked once, twice. The door opened a crack. Grace stood there, surprise flickering across her tired face. Her daughter peered from behind her leg, clutching a stuffed rabbit. "Mr. Rhodes," she said softly, "what are you doing here?" He looked at her, at the shadows under her eyes, at the calm that hadn't left her even now. "I came to return something." He held out the watch. "It was never yours to return," she said quietly. He swallowed. "I know. I accused you unjustly. I'm sorry." She studied him for a long moment, then stepped aside. "You should come in. You'll catch cold out there. Inside." The apartment was small but warm. The smell of soup filled the air. Lily sat back down at the table, coloring again. Daniel glanced around the mismatched chairs, the patched curtain, the neatness of a life built from almost nothing. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said finally. "I only wanted you to know I was wrong." Grace nodded slowly. "You didn't know. People rarely do, until it's too late." Her tone wasn't bitter, only tired. He didn't know which hurt more. After a pause, she added, "You could help, though. Not me, others like me. People who work hard and still get looked at as though they might break something just by breathing." He met her eyes. "Maybe I can." When he left, Lily waved from the doorway. "Goodbye, Mr." He smiled faintly. "Goodbye." Lily, back in his car. He sat for a moment, drenched, heart heavier and lighter all at once. The rain kept falling, steady and endless. For the first time in years, he felt something shift inside him, not guilt alone, but a kind of awakening. The silence that had haunted the Rhodes estate was no longer outside him. It had moved inward, forcing him to listen to a voice he had long ignored. Morning crept in softly over Seattle, pale light sliding through streaks of rain on glass. The city was still half asleep, wrapped in mist, inside the Rhodes estate. Daniel sat in the study, a cup of coffee untouched beside him, his thoughts heavier than the storm outside. He had been awake all night. The apology he had given Grace kept replaying in his head, not the words themselves, but the look in her eyes. She had listened, nodded, accepted his words, but there was something deeper behind her calm. It wasn't anger, nor forgiveness. It was distance, like she'd already moved beyond him, beyond the moment. He knew he couldn't undo what he had done, but perhaps he could make amends, somehow. When Evan entered, Daniel didn't look up. "What did the board say about the statement?" "They've approved your absence for 2 weeks." Evan replied, "They think you're taking personal time." "Good." Daniel closed the file on his desk. "That's exactly what I need." Evan hesitated before speaking again. "Sir, about Miss Miller, what will you do now?" Daniel finally turned toward him. "What I should have done from the beginning. Listen." He stood, straightened his jacket, and left the room. Grace, meanwhile, was at the diner across from her apartment, pouring coffee for early customers. The owner had given her temporary hours less pay, but enough to keep her and Lily afloat. She moved quietly, like she was trying not to disturb the world around her. When the bell over the door rang, she didn't look up right away. She was too used to the rhythm of the morning pour, wipe, smile, repeat. Then a familiar voice broke through the clatter of cups. "Miss Miller!" She froze. When she turned, Daniel Rhodes stood in the doorway, rain dripping from his coat, eyes searching but uncertain. He looked out of place among the cracked leather booths and cheap neon lights. "Mr. Rhodes," she said softly, "you shouldn't be here." "I probably shouldn't," he admitted, stepping closer. "But I wanted to talk. May I sit?" The customers glanced curiously. Grace nodded and gestured to an empty booth. "Just for a moment," she said. When he sat down, the old vinyl creaked under his weight. For a while, neither spoke. Daniel's eyes wandered to the chip table, to the way she kept her hands folded neatly, her fingers red from detergent. "I watched the camera footage again," he said finally. "I saw everything. I know what happened. You were innocent all along." Grace looked at him evenly. "You already told me that." "Yes," he said, "but I don't think you understand what I saw. It wasn't just proof. It was you, feeding that stray cat in the rain, staying late when everyone else went home, fixing the smallest things no one else noticed." Her expression didn't change, but her eyes softened slightly. "You didn't need a camera to see that, Mr. Rhodes." He nodded slowly. "You're right. I didn't need one, but I did." Silence stretched between them. Outside, the rain had started again, light but steady. Grace glanced toward the window. "You came here for something," she said. "Say it." Daniel took a breath. "I want to make things right. I don't expect you to come back to work, but I want to offer you something else. A position with a project I'm starting, a fund for staff welfare, housing support, education grants, medical care. It'll be run independently, and I want you to help design it." Grace blinked, taken aback. "Me you," he said firmly. "You know what people need better than I do." She looked down at her hands. "Why me, Mr. Rhodes? Because you feel guilty." His reply was quiet. "Because you made me see what I'd stopped seeing." For a long moment, she said nothing. The hum of the diner filled the air. The hiss of coffee machines, the rustle of newspapers, the faint laugh of a man at the counter. Finally, she looked up. "If I agree, it's not because of guilt or favors. It has to mean something. It has to help people who never get seen. Not just maids and cleaners, but anyone who's invisible in places like yours." Daniel nodded, relief flickering across his face. "Then we'll do it your way." Before he could say more, the diner owner called from the counter. "Grace, order's ready for table 3. She stood, adjusting her apron. "I'll think about it," she said. "But for now, I have work to finish." When she walked away, Daniel remained seated for a few seconds, watching her move through the diner, graceful, focused, calm. Then he rose quietly and left, the bell chiming behind him. Outside, he stood beneath the awning, letting the rain hit his shoulders. The cold didn't bother him. For the first time in years, he felt something close to clarity. Later that evening, Evan found him in the office surrounded by notes. "Sir," he said, "I've never seen you stay this late voluntarily." Daniel didn't look up. "We're drafting the foundation proposal. I need data average wages, cost of living, healthcare gaps. Start compiling everything tomorrow." Evan blinked. "You're serious?" Daniel gave a faint smile. "I'm done being blind." The next few weeks passed in a blur of plans and calls. Daniel attended meetings he'd usually ignore: HR consultations, labor discussions, community outreach sessions. His team was confused. His investors were skeptical, but he didn't care. When the proposal was ready, he called it the Dignity Project. Grace agreed to meet him again at the estate to review it. She arrived one evening in a plain gray coat, her hair tied back. The air smelled of rain and pine. Inside the conference room, Daniel waited with folders spread across the table. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I almost didn't," she admitted. "I'm glad you did." He showed her the plan's housing programs, healthcare access, scholarships for workers' children. Grace flipped through the pages, silent, reading carefully. "This is good," she said finally, "but you're missing something." "What's that?" She tapped one of the pages. "Representation. The people you're trying to help need a voice on the board. Otherwise, it's just charity, not change." Daniel nodded slowly. "Then you'll be that voice." Her eyes met his. "I'll only accept if it's a real seat equal, not symbolic." He smiled faintly. "That's the only kind worth offering." They worked together for hours, adjusting details, arguing softly over priorities. When the clock struck 10, Grace gathered her notes. "I'll help build it," she said quietly. "But not for you, for the ones who'll come after me." Daniel nodded. "That's exactly the point." As she left, he followed her to the front door. The rain had eased into mist, soft against the light. She paused on the steps. "You've changed, Mr. Rhodes," she said. "Maybe," he replied. "Or maybe I'm just finally waking up." She smiled a small, genuine smile and walked away into the drizzle. That night, Daniel stood by the window again, looking out over the dark yard. The bench where Grace once fed the cat was still there, and beside it, the same stray sat curled, dry under the awning. He murmured to himself, "You started something you'll never even see." From the distance, thunder rolled once more, soft and distant. The truth had come out, but more than that, it had changed him. The man who once lived by numbers had begun to live by conscience. He turned off the lights and let the house fall into silence. Not the cold silence of before, but a calm, living quiet. For the first time, it felt like peace. The rain had returned to Seattle, heavy and relentless. It beat against the tall windows of the Rhodes estate like a drum that would not stop. Daniel stood by the glass, his reflection pale and distant, watching the storm roll in. He had grown used to the rain lately. It felt like both punishment and renewal. 3 months had passed since the launch of the Dignity Project. Grace Miller had agreed to serve on the advisory board, though she insisted on remaining part-time at the diner to stay grounded. As she put it, Daniel respected that, though part of him wished she would return fully. The project was growing faster than expected. Dozens of workers from different companies had already applied for assistance childcare grants, housing aid, health coverage. The foundation's name had started to spread quietly through the city. And yet, Daniel felt uneasy. He hadn't heard from Grace in nearly a week. No emails, no calls, no updates. That was unlike her. Evan knocked gently and stepped inside. "Sir, the board meeting with city representatives has been moved to Thursday." Daniel nodded absently. "Thank you." Evan hesitated before adding, "You've asked about Miss Miller 3 times today. Should I contact her?" Daniel looked at him, then back at the rain. "No, I'll do it myself." He picked up his phone and dialed her number. It rang until the line went dead. He tried again. Nothing. Something twisted in his chest. He didn't want to admit it, but worry had already settled in. He grabbed his coat and keys. Sir Evan called after him. "Cancel my next appointment," Daniel said. "I'll be out for a while." He drove through the city as the storm thickened, the windshield wipers moving frantically, the streets blurred with reflections of headlights and rain. He reached the small apartment building where Grace lived and parked. The hallway smelled of damp wood and wet fabric. When he knocked, no one answered. He tried again, louder this time. Still nothing. A neighbor across the hall opened her door, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes. "You're looking for Grace?" "Yes," Daniel said. "Do you know where she is?" The woman frowned. "She left early 2 nights ago with her little girl. Looked worried. Said she was taking Lily to the hospital." Daniel's pulse quickened. "The hospital? Which one, Harborview? I think—" He thanked her and turned to go, his shoes splashing through puddles as he ran back to the car. The drive to Harborview felt endless. Inside the hospital lobby, the smell of disinfectant and rain mixed in the air. Daniel approached the front desk. "Grace Miller," he said quickly. She came in with her daughter. "Do you have a record?" The nurse typed for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, Lily Miller. Admitted to pediatrics 2 nights ago. Can I see them?" "Are you family?" Daniel hesitated. "A friend, a colleague." The nurse studied him briefly, then softened. "Room 314. End of the hall." He thanked her and hurried upstairs. When he reached the room, he stopped at the door. Grace was sitting beside the hospital bed, her hair slightly damp, her hands folded in her lap. Lily lay sleeping, an oxygen tube beneath her nose, her small chest rising and falling unevenly. Grace looked up and froze. "Mr. Rhodes." He stepped inside quietly. "I called. You didn't answer." "I left my phone at home," she said softly. "Lily's asthma got worse. The doctor said the damp weather triggered it." Daniel glanced at the child, his heart tightening. "Is she going to be all right?" Grace nodded. "They're monitoring her. She'll need better medication and a cleaner place to live. The doctor said mold in the apartment could be part of the problem." Daniel took a deep breath. I'll take care of it. The foundation can cover medical costs and relocation. Grace's voice was gentle but firm. That's not your responsibility. It is, he said. If this project means anything, it's exactly for this. You shouldn't have to choose between your job and your child's health. She looked at him for a long time, then sighed. Sometimes I forget you're new at this, helping people, without feeling like you're buying redemption. He almost smiled. Maybe I am buying redemption, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't take it. Her lips curved slightly, tired but sincere. You've changed, Daniel. He shook his head. No, I'm just finally learning to see. The room fell into a quiet rhythm, the soft beeping of machines, the hum of the storm outside. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Lily stirred, murmuring softly. Grace brushed her daughter's hair back gently, her face softening in a way that made Daniel's chest ache. You really love her, he said quietly. Grace smiled faintly. She's my reason for everything. That night, Daniel stayed in the hospital lounge. He told himself it was just to make sure they were all right, but deep down he knew it was more than that. Watching Grace's quiet strength reminded him of something human, something fragile. By morning, Lily's breathing had improved. Grace stepped out of the room to find Daniel asleep in one of the chairs, his coat draped over his shoulders. She hesitated, then gently placed a blanket from the nurse's station across him. When he woke, she was sitting across from him, a cup of coffee in her hands. You stayed, she said. I couldn't leave. Why? He looked at her for a moment before answering. Because I've spent years surrounded by people who only take. You're the first person I've met who only gives. She shook her head slightly. No one only gives. We all break somewhere. I just can't afford to break yet. Daniel nodded slowly. Then let me help carry it. Grace looked at him, uncertain whether to trust his words. But there was something honest in his voice, something she hadn't heard before. Over the next few days, Daniel visited often. He brought paperwork to expedite Lily's relocation grant and new medical coverage. Grace refused at first, then finally agreed under one condition. You'll treat this like any other application, no favors. He smiled, understood. When Lily was finally discharged, Daniel insisted on driving them home to a new apartment the foundation had found on the north side, near a park and away from the damp walls of their old building. As they stepped into the bright, dry space, Lily's eyes widened. Is this really ours? Mommy Grace knelt and hugged her tightly. Yes, sweetheart, it's ours. Daniel stood by the doorway, watching the moment unfold. For once, he didn't feel the need to speak. The sight itself was enough. Later, as Grace unpacked boxes, she turned to him. You could have just sent someone. You didn't have to come yourself. I wanted to, he said simply. Sometimes, it's not about delegation. It's about presence. Grace looked at him for a moment and nodded. Then thank you for being here. He smiled faintly. You've taught me more than you realize. When he left that evening, the rain had stopped. The city lights reflected softly off the wet pavement, but for once, the world didn't feel so cold. That night, Daniel sat in his car outside the new apartment longer than he needed to. Through the window, he saw Grace and Lily laughing together as they arranged the furniture. It was a small moment, but to him, it was everything. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a billionaire surrounded by emptiness. He felt human again. The weeks that followed brought an unfamiliar calm. The city's winter softened into something gentler, and for the first time in years, Daniel Rhodes found himself waking without dread. His mornings no longer began with endless calls or sharp emails. Instead, they started with a quiet walk through the garden, a cup of coffee in hand, and the faint sound of rain easing off the rooftops. The Dignity Project had begun to draw attention. Newspapers wrote cautious praise about the billionaire who had suddenly found his conscience. Social media buzzed with photos of the first families receiving assistance, housing support, and medical care. People called it a miracle. Others called it a publicity stunt. Daniel didn't care what they called it, only that it worked. Still, he knew how fragile it all was. For every person who benefited, 100 more waited. For every sincere volunteer, there was a critic waiting to twist the story. That morning, Evan entered the study with a stack of reports. "The numbers are good, sir," he said, "but the press is asking for interviews. They're questioning your motives. Some say this is just a distraction from your company's recent layoffs." Daniel frowned slightly. "Let them say what they want. The project isn't about my reputation." Evan hesitated. "Maybe not for you, but for Miss Miller, it's different. People are starting to recognize her name. They're saying she's the real face of this project." Daniel's gaze lifted. "She is," he said simply. "She's the reason it exists." Grace, however, wasn't as comfortable with the attention. Her new apartment had brought peace, and Lily's health was improving, but the sudden spotlight unsettled her. Reporters had found out her connection to Daniel, and questions followed her everywhere about her past, her job, even the false accusation months earlier. One afternoon, as she left the foundation office, a young journalist approached her on the street. "Ms. Miller, how does it feel to be the woman who changed Daniel Rhodes's heart?" Grace stopped mid-step, startled by the phrasing. "I didn't change anyone's heart," she said softly. "He changed himself. But your stories become symbolic." The reporter pressed, "The maid who inspired a billionaire. Do you feel proud?" Grace hesitated, then shook her head. "No. I feel responsible." That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, the city glowing beneath her. Lily slept peacefully in the next room, her soft breathing filling the silence. Grace whispered to herself, this was supposed to help people not turn into a story. A few days later, she met Daniel at the foundation's main office. He was reviewing contracts when she entered, her expression calm but serious. "Daniel," she said quietly, "we need to talk about the press." He set the papers aside. "I know, they're relentless, but it will pass." "It's not about me," she said. "It's about what they're turning this into. They're making it about you, or about us, instead of the people we're helping." Daniel nodded slowly. "You're right. I should have seen that coming. You can't fix everything with money. Daniel," she continued, "sometimes the best thing you can do is step back and let the story fade." He looked at her for a long time before answering. "And what about you? You're the one they keep calling the symbol of change." She smiled faintly. "Symbols are dangerous. People forget they're human." There was silence between them. Rain began tapping against the windows again, soft and steady. Finally, Daniel spoke. "Grace, you don't have to do this anymore if it's too much." She shook her head. "No, this project matters. I just want it to stay true to what it was meant to be." He exhaled slowly. "Then let's make sure it does." Over the following weeks, they restructured the foundation. Grace pushed for transparency, for local voices to have real power. Daniel supported her decisions, often silently, sometimes against his own advisors. But the more they worked together, the more something unspoken began to stir between them. It wasn't romance. Not yet. It was something quieter, more fragile. A growing understanding built on shared purpose and the memory of what they had endured together. One evening, as they finished a long meeting, Grace stood by the window overlooking the harbor. "You know," she said softly, "I used to think people like you didn't notice the rest of us, that you lived in a different world." Daniel smiled faintly. "We do. Or we did. I thought power made me untouchable, but it just made me blind." Grace turned to face him. "And now," he said, "I'm learning to see without numbers." She laughed quietly. "That's a start." As they walked out together, Daniel noticed something in her step lighter. Steadier. She was finding peace, even as she carried the weight of the project. But that peace was short-lived. 2 weeks later, a scandal broke. A news outlet published a story claiming the Dignity Project was misusing funds. The headline was brutal: "Billionaire's Redemption Fund Built on Lies Within Hours." Social media was ablaze. Anonymous sources claimed Grace Miller was coordinating payments to unverified recipients. The story spread faster than truth could follow. Evan rushed into Daniel's office, pale. "Sir, we're getting flooded with calls. Reporters are camped outside. They're targeting Miss Miller directly." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Get me the full report. Now." He scrolled through the article, disbelief turning to anger. None of it made sense. The evidence was fabricated, the quotes twisted, but public opinion had already turned. Grace, meanwhile, was at home when she saw her face on the television. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing. She turned it off and sat on the couch, numb. Lily peeked out from her room. "Mommy, are you okay?" Grace forced a smile. "It's just noise, sweetheart. It'll pass." But it didn't pass. It grew louder. The next day, Daniel called her. His voice was steady, but there was steel in it. "Grace, don't speak to the press. I'll handle this." "Daniel," she said quietly, "they'll ruin everything. Not if I stop them first." That evening, Daniel held an emergency press conference. Cameras flashed as he stepped to the podium. He didn't read from a statement. Instead, he spoke plainly. "The accusations against Grace Miller are false. Every transaction has been verified and documented. If you need someone to blame, blame me. I built this project. I made every decision. If you think this is about guilt or image, then put my name on your headlines, not hers." The room went silent. A reporter shouted, "Mr. Rhodes, are you saying you accept full responsibility?" Daniel met the reporter's gaze. "I'm saying responsibility is the least a man like me can give." The press erupted with questions, but Daniel walked away before answering any. That night, Grace watched the conference replay on TV, tears quietly slipping down her cheeks. For the first time, she realized how deeply he had changed, not in words, but in actions. Later, when he called, she answered with a trembling voice, "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," he said softly, "because this time, I saw clearly from the beginning." Grace closed her eyes. "Then maybe there's hope for both of us." The line went quiet. Outside her window, the rain began again, soft, cleansing, endless. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone. 2 weeks passed since Grace and Lily moved into their new apartment. The air there smelled of sunlight and freshly cut wood, a rare comfort after months of damp walls and restless nights. Lily's health was improving. Her cough had faded, her cheeks were pink again, and her laughter filled the little home like music. Grace should have felt at peace. Yet, beneath that calm, a quiet unease stirred. Gratitude could be heavy sometimes, especially when it came from a man like Daniel Rhodes. Each day she worked with him on the Dignity Project. They met in the new downtown office, where the walls were lined with simple photographs of workers, families, and volunteers' faces that reminded Daniel of what truly mattered. Grace sat across from him at meetings, focused and steady. But every time their eyes met, something unspoken passed between them. It wasn't romance, not yet. Not exactly. It was understanding, threaded with tension. He was learning humility. She was learning how to accept kindness without losing pride. One morning, after a meeting with the city council, Grace waited by the elevator. Daniel approached, holding a folder. "You handled that well," he said. "The way you spoke about fair wages, it made them listen." Grace smiled slightly. "They only listened because you were in the room." "Daniel, power has a way of amplifying the truth." "Maybe," he said. "But it's your truth they're hearing." The elevator doors opened. They stepped in together. The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was charged, filled with things neither dared to say. When they reached the ground floor, rain was falling again outside, light and steady. Daniel walked with her to the car. "Do you need a ride home?" he asked. She shook her head. "I'll take the bus. Lily likes watching the raindrops on the window." He smiled. "She's a poet already. She sees beauty where others see inconvenience," Grace said softly. "Children do that." He hesitated, then said, "You've changed how I see things, Grace." Her gaze met his. "And you've changed how I'm seen." "That's not the same thing." He wanted to respond, but she turned away gently. "Good night, Mr. Rhodes." He watched her disappear into the rain, her figure blurring like a watercolor fading into gray. That night, Daniel stayed late at the office. He sat alone, staring at the project reports on his desk, but his mind wasn't on the numbers. It was on her words. "You've changed how I'm seen." There was a truth there. He had power to alter perceptions, to shift the weight of judgment that people like Grace carried their whole lives. But could he ever truly understand what that weight felt like? Evan found him there near midnight. "Sir, you should get some rest," he said gently. Daniel leaned back, rubbing his eyes. "Do you ever think about how easy it is for people like me to feel good about helping, when the people we help are the ones who've done the real surviving?" Evan smiled faintly. "You're thinking too much like a philosopher and not enough like a CEO." "Maybe that's the point," Daniel said quietly. Meanwhile, across town, Grace was tucking Lily into bed. The little girl looked up at her. "Mommy, Mr. Rhodes is nice." "Do you like him?" Grace smiled softly. "He's learning to be kind. That's harder than people think." "Does he make you smile?" Grace hesitated. Sometimes," she admitted, "but I don't know what that means yet." After Lily fell asleep, Grace sat by the window with a cup of tea, staring at the city lights. Gratitude was a strange thing. It could warm your heart, but it could also make you feel small. She didn't want to owe anyone anything, yet she couldn't deny that Daniel's kindness had made her life easier, safer. The next morning, Daniel arrived at the foundation's office to find reporters waiting by the door. Their cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward. "Mr. Rhodes, can you comment on allegations that the Dignity Project is just a PR move after the Rhodes Industries layoffs?" Daniel froze. "Layoffs?" Evan stepped forward, shielding him. "We'll release a statement later," he said firmly, ushering Daniel inside. In the elevator, Daniel turned to him. "What are they talking about?" "There was a restructuring at one of your subsidiary companies. Over 200 workers let go last week. The media is connecting it to the foundation. saying you're using charity to cover guilt. Daniel's stomach sank. Get the board on a call now. When Grace arrived later that morning, she sensed the tension immediately. The staff whispered, the mood brittle. She entered Daniel's office and found him pacing. They think the Dignity Project is a facade, he said, frustration simmering in his voice, a distraction from corporate cuts. Grace studied him for a moment. And is it? He stopped. What is their truth in what they're saying? She asked quietly. Were those layoffs necessary? He looked away. I didn't authorize them directly. But maybe I didn't stop them either. She nodded slowly. Then the question isn't whether they're right. It's what you do now. Her calm pierced him more deeply than anger would have. That afternoon, Daniel called an emergency meeting with his executives. The room was full of suits and silence. He stood at the head of the table. Effective immediately, he said. The company will reallocate a portion of my personal equity shares to rehire essential workers. The layoffs were a mistake. The foundation doesn't exist to clean guilt. It exists to fix what caused it. The room erupted with objections, financial concerns, investor panic, but Daniel's voice cut through. If doing the right thing costs us comfort, then it's worth the discomfort. By evening, news outlets were already buzzing with the announcement. Public opinion began to shift. Grace watched the report from her apartment, her face unreadable. The next day, she walked into Daniel's office with 2 cups of coffee. You made a mess, she said, setting one down for him. He looked up, half smiling, a necessary one. She nodded. That's the kind that matters. They sat in quiet for a moment before Daniel said, You were right yesterday. Gratitude shouldn't silence truth. Grace met his eyes, and truth shouldn't erase compassion. They both smiled softly, tiredly, but with something genuine behind it. That evening, as Daniel drove Grace and Lily home after a late meeting, the city glowed with rain-slicked lights. Lily slept in the back seat, her head against the window. Grace looked out quietly, then said, You've given people hope. Daniel, just be careful, it's fragile. He glanced at her. So are people. She turned to him, her expression gentle. Yes, but sometimes fragile things hold the most strength. When he dropped them off, Grace hesitated before leaving. Thank you, she said softly. For what? For listening. Daniel nodded. Always. As she walked away, he watched her through the drizzle until she disappeared behind the apartment door. Something in him ached, not with longing, but with understanding, the kind that changes a man quietly, permanently. That night, when he returned home, the mansion didn't feel empty anymore. The silence was no longer punishment. It was reflection. For the first time, Daniel Rhodes felt not like a billionaire trying to be good, but like a man learning what goodness meant. The rain had eased into mist that morning, and a faint light spread across the bay. Inside the Rhodes estate, the air was still, as if holding its breath. Daniel stood in front of an old photograph, one he hadn't looked at in years. It was framed in dark oak, hanging near the piano in the drawing room. The picture showed him and his late wife, Amelia, on the day they opened their first office together. She was laughing, wind blowing her hair, one hand on his shoulder. Her smile had always been his compass, her empathy his guide. But after she passed, the world turned gray. He had buried himself in work, mistaking progress for purpose. Now, seeing that photograph again, he realized something painful Grace reminded him of her. Not in appearance, but in spirit. Both had that quiet courage, that ability to stay kind in a world that punished kindness. He turned away from the photo, his chest tight. That resemblance both comforted and haunted him. Later that day, he met Grace at the Foundation's office. She was standing near the window, reviewing reports from the latest outreach programs. The sunlight caught her profile, soft and serious. "You wanted to see me?" she asked, turning to face him. "Yes," he said, walking closer. "There's something I'd like you to help me with." She tilted her head slightly. "Another project." He nodded. "Sort of. The annual Rhodes Charity Gala's next month. It's always been performative. Champagne. Rich donors pretending to care. I want to change that this year. I want it to mean something." Grace crossed her arms. "And you want my help?" "I want your truth," he said. "The real stories, the ones that remind people why this foundation exists." Her eyes softened. "You're asking me to stand in a room full of people who think charity is a photo opportunity." "Yes," he admitted. "But they'll listen to you." "Grace, you make people see what they'd rather ignore." She looked at him for a moment, then smiled faintly. "All right, I'll do it. But only if you promise to tell a story, too." He frowned slightly. "What story yours?" she said simply. "The one you never tell." He hesitated. "Some stories aren't meant for microphones." Grace's voice was gentle. Maybe that's why they matter. He didn't answer right away, but the thought lingered long after she left the room. That night, he found himself sitting again before Amelia's photograph. For the first time in years, he spoke aloud to it. She was right. "You know," he murmured, "about everything." The next week flew by. The Foundation's gala preparations filled every hour decor, logistics, speeches. Grace helped design the event to reflect real change. No glitter, no hollow praise. The invitations carried simple words. Compassion is not charity. It's justice with a heartbeat. The night of the gala arrived under a sky streaked with silver rain. Guests arrived in sleek cars, stepping into the grand hall, now transformed. Instead of lavish ornaments, the walls displayed photographs of workers, families, and children, the people whose lives had changed through the Dignity Project. Daniel stood near the stage, adjusting his tie. Evan approached quietly. "Everything's ready. The press is here, and Miss Miller just arrived." When Daniel turned, his breath caught slightly. Grace entered wearing a modest navy dress, elegant but simple. She moved through the crowd with quiet confidence, not dazzled by wealth, not intimidated by power. People noticed her presence. Authenticity tends to shine, even in glittering rooms. "Are you nervous?" she asked when she reached him. "Terrified," he said honestly. She smiled. "Good. It means you care." The evening unfolded smoothly. Speeches were given, donations pledged. Then it was Grace's turn to speak. She stepped up to the podium, the room dimming slightly, the spotlight soft on her face. "I used to believe people like me didn't belong in rooms like this," she began. "We were the ones serving the meals, cleaning the floors, invisible to the very people we kept comfortable." The crowd grew still, but sometimes invisibility gives you a better view. You see what others overlook. You see effort where others see routine. You see struggle where others see order. And you learn that kindness without respect is just pity wearing a mask. Her voice was calm, her words deliberate. What the Dignity Project did was not charity. It was recognition. Recognition that people's worth isn't tied to the shine of their shoes or the name on their paycheck. She looked toward Daniel. "Someone once told me, They wanted to change how others saw me. What they didn't realize was that I didn't need to be seen. I needed to be understood. A quiet ripple passed through the room. Grace stepped down, her eyes meeting Daniel's briefly before she returned to her seat. Then it was his turn. Daniel took the stage slowly, his reflection flickering across the glass walls behind him. I wasn't always a man who understood struggle. He began. For a long time, I measured success in profit and progress. I forgot that people aren't line items on a balance sheet. He paused, his gaze sweeping the crowd. My late wife, Amelia, used to say, "We can't fix everything, Daniel, but we can at least be gentle." I lost sight of that after she passed, until someone reminded me what gentleness looks like. His eyes found Grace in the audience. That reminder came from a person who had every reason to hate me, but didn't. Instead, she showed me what real strength is. The room was silent. No applause. No murmurs. Just listening. Daniel continued, voice lower now. If you want to honor compassion tonight, don't write a check to ease your conscience. Go home and look at the people who make your lives possible. See them. Really see them. When he stepped down, the applause began not polite, but genuine, the kind that comes from somewhere deep. After the event ended, Daniel slipped out to the terrace for air. The rain had started again, light and whispering. Grace joined him, holding 2 glasses of water. You did well, she said softly. So did you, he replied. You moved them. They needed moving, she said with a faint smile. People forget that privilege dulls the senses. Daniel looked at her, his expression unreadable. You sound like Amelia. Grace turned to him. Your wife. He nodded slowly. She believed in people the way you do. She used to feed stray cats behind our office. Said gentleness was the most radical thing you could practice in a hard world. Grace smiled faintly. Maybe she'd like that you're learning again. He chuckled softly. Maybe she sent you to remind me. They stood in silence for a moment, listening to the rain. Then Grace said, You know, Daniel, change isn't just about helping others. Sometimes it's about forgiving yourself. He looked at her then, really looked, and something in his chest loosened. I'm trying, he said quietly. That's enough, she replied. Trying is where healing begins. Later that night, when Daniel returned home, he passed Amelia's photograph once more. For the first time, he didn't turn away. He smiled faintly and whispered, Thank you for sending her. Outside, the rain eased, and the world seemed softer somehow. The days after the gala should have been golden. Donations poured in. The media called the event the most genuine act of philanthropy the city had seen in decades, and the Dignity Project became a symbol of hope across Seattle. But good things never last long before the world finds a way to twist them. It started with a whisper. A journalist from a business column published a piece titled, Behind the Billionaire's Redemption, Who is Grace Miller? The tone was polite on the surface, but the intent was poisonous. The article implied that Grace's position at the foundation was a product of favoritism, suggesting that Daniel's sudden moral awakening had personal motivations. By noon, gossip had spread like wildfire. Tabloids printed her photo beside headlines that blurred kindness into scandal, Billionaire, and the Maid charity or infatuation. When Daniel saw the first article, his jaw tightened. Who leaked this, he demanded. Evan, standing by his desk, held the printed paper. Someone from the board, most likely. They think your connection to Grace is compromising. My connection? Daniel snapped. "She built half this program. Without her, none of this would exist." Evan hesitated. "Public perception doesn't care about truth, sir. You know that." Daniel's anger cooled into something colder resolve. "Find out who started this, and make sure Grace doesn't read it before I do." But it was too late. Across town, Grace sat in the Foundation's cafeteria with her colleagues when the news broke on everyone's phones. The room went uncomfortably quiet. She didn't need to read the full article. She could feel every gaze that lingered on her. Later, in Daniel's office, she stood holding the newspaper, her face pale but composed. "You should have expected this," she said softly. "I didn't," Daniel admitted. "I underestimated how cruel people can be when something good challenges them." She gave a small, humorless smile. "Welcome to my world, Grace," he began, stepping closer. "I'll fix this." "You can't fix perception," she said. "You can only live through it." Her calmness only made him feel worse. "You shouldn't have to go through this. I'll issue a statement clarify that our relationship is professional." Her eyes flicked up to meet his. "Is it?" He froze. The silence between them stretched. She sighed, looking away. "You've done more for me than anyone ever has. But right now, that kindness is turning into something the world can use against us. Against me." He wanted to argue, to tell her it didn't matter. But he saw the truth in her eyes. It did matter to her pride, her dignity, her life outside his name. "Then what do you suggest?" he asked quietly. She took a deep breath. "Let me go for a while. Distance will silence them faster than defense." "No," he said instantly. "That's what they want to erase you." "I'm not being erased," she replied gently. "I'm choosing peace." Her words landed like stones in his chest. That evening, Grace sent in her resignation letter, temporary leave, effective immediately. When Daniel read it, the words blurred before his eyes. He didn't call her. He didn't know what to say that wouldn't sound selfish. Days passed. The office felt empty. The energy that once filled the Dignity Project dulled without her presence. Evan noticed the change in his employer's face, the sleepless eyes, the quiet frustration. One night, Daniel sat alone in his office, scrolling through the storm of online comments. Some defended Grace, others mocked her. One post read, "She's just another Cinderella looking for a castle." He closed the screen, disgusted. Meanwhile, Grace tried to return to a quieter life. She worked part-time at the diner again, her apron smelling faintly of coffee and rain. But the whispers followed her there too. Customers stared. A few asked invasive questions. Lily, too young to understand, only noticed her mother smiling less. One night, as they walked home under the drizzle, Lily said softly, "Mommy, did you do something bad?" Grace stopped. "No, sweetheart. People just like to talk about you and Mr. Rhodes." Grace looked down at her daughter's curious eyes and forced a smile. "He's a good man, Lily. But sometimes, even good people become stories. Other people want to sell." Back at the mansion, Evan entered Daniel's study holding a report. "We found the source. It was board member Collins. He sold the story to the press for an anonymous donation." Daniel's voice was calm but dangerous. "Fire him. He's already resigned before we could." He knew what was coming. Daniel exhaled, staring out the rain-streaked window. "It doesn't matter. The damage is done." Evan hesitated. "You could still fight the narrative." "Sir, a public interview. Perhaps. Tell them the truth." Daniel shook his head. "If I speak, they'll just twist it more. The best way to protect her is to let the storm pass." Evan studied him quietly. And what about you? Daniel gave a small, weary smile. I built empires from noise. I can handle silence. But the silence wasn't peace, it was punishment. A week later, the foundation hosted a community outreach event. Grace wasn't there. Her absence was a ghost in every conversation. Daniel stood on stage delivering his speech, his words steady but hollow. After the event, he returned to the now half-empty office. On his desk lay a small envelope without a return address. Inside was a folded piece of paper, a child's drawing. It showed 3 figures standing under an umbrella in the rain, a tall man, a woman, and a little girl holding their hands. At the bottom, in uneven letters, were the words, "Thank you for the house." He recognized Lily's handwriting immediately. Beneath the drawing was a short note from Grace. "We're okay. Don't lose yourself defending me. Some storms clear the air. Daniel, let this one." He held the note for a long time, the edges trembling slightly between his fingers. Then he smiled sadly, but genuinely. Outside, the rain began to fall harder, but this time he didn't hide from it. He stepped out into the courtyard, letting the cold drops soak his shirt, his hair, his skin. He looked up at the sky, eyes closed, and whispered, "Let it rain." Because for the first time, he understood that storms weren't always the enemy. Sometimes they were necessary to wash away, to renew, to reveal what stayed standing after the thunder faded. Winter came early that year. Seattle's skies hung heavy with gray clouds, and the bay was shrouded in fog thick enough to blur the skyline. The rain had turned colder, softer, less a storm, more a memory. Inside the Rhodes mansion, a fire crackled faintly, filling the empty rooms with a kind of half-warmth that never reached the heart. Daniel sat in his study, staring at the unopened mail that had piled up over the past weeks. He had stopped caring about most of it: donor reports, press inquiries, event invitations. The house was quieter than ever. Even Evan had learned not to disturb him unless it was necessary. The silence suited him, or so he told himself. But some nights, when the fire burned low and the city lights flickered in the distance, he caught himself listening for a voice that wasn't there. He missed the sound of Grace's calm reasoning, her laughter that broke tension, the quiet certainty she carried even in chaos. And though he'd never say it aloud, he missed Lily's small voice too, the way she used to draw on the margins of his meeting notes or hum softly when she waited for her mother. Then one evening, as he was about to retire for the night, Evan knocked on the door. "Sir, you might want to see this," he said, holding out a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. Daniel frowned. "Who's it from?" "No sender name, but it was delivered by hand." Daniel took it carefully. Inside was a folded letter and a small, worn scarf red wool, the kind children wore. He recognized it instantly. Lily's. He unfolded the letter. Grace's handwriting flowed across the page, steady but touched with tenderness. "Dear Daniel, I hope this finds you well, though I know the word well may not mean much these days. We've been staying in a small coastal town south of Tacoma. It's quiet here. Lily loves the sea, though she says the waves sound like they're whispering secrets. I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about the storm, the rumors, the silence that followed. I don't regret stepping away. It gave me space to breathe, to remember who I am without the noise of other people's judgment. But I also realized something else: you don't stop caring about people just because you're not near them. Distance doesn't erase gratitude. It deepens it. Lily still talks about you. She asked if we could send you her scarf. She said you looked cold the last time she saw you. I know the world still questions your motives, Let them. The truth is quieter. It doesn't shout. It just stays. Take care of yourself. Daniel, you taught me that change can begin even in the rain. Maybe it's time you believed it for yourself, too. With gratitude. Grace Daniel set the letter down slowly, his chest tightening in a way that wasn't pain exactly, more like recognition. He ran his hand over the small scarf, feeling the threads, the warmth of it. It smelled faintly of lavender and salt. For a long time, he just sat there. Then he whispered, "Thank you, Grace." The next morning, he called Evan into the study. "We're going to the coast," he said simply. Evan blinked. "Now, yes. There's something I need to see." The drive was long and gray, the landscape shifting from the sharp edges of the city to the softer tones of the countryside. The air smelled of pine and sea salt. When they reached the small coastal town Grace had mentioned, Daniel stepped out of the car and breathed deeply. The ocean stretched before him, restless and wide. He asked around quietly and soon found the small cottage she had described in her letter. It was painted pale blue, with white shutters and a little garden out front. He hesitated before knocking. When the door opened, it was Lily who appeared first. Her eyes widened in surprise. "Mr. Rhodes," she said, her face lighting up. "Hey there." "Lily," he said softly, kneeling down to her height. "You've grown." She giggled. "Mom said you were too busy saving the world to visit." "Well," he smiled, "the world can wait sometimes." Grace appeared at the doorway then, her expression caught between shock and something softer. She wore a simple gray sweater, her hair pulled back loosely. "Daniel," she said quietly. "I hope it's not bad timing," he said, straightening. "It's unexpected," she admitted. "I got your letter," he said, holding out the red scarf. It was too warm to wear, but too kind to ignore. A faint smile curved her lips. "Lily insisted you'd need it." "She was right," he said. "I did." They stood in silence for a moment, the waves crashing faintly behind them. Grace stepped aside. "Would you like to come inside?" The cottage was small but full of life. Books lined the shelves, seashells decorated the windowsills, and the scent of freshly baked bread lingered in the air. Lily ran off to get her sketchbook, proudly showing Daniel her latest drawings waves. Boats, a lighthouse. "She's happy here," Grace said softly, watching her daughter. "I can see that," Daniel replied. "You both deserve peace." Grace looked at him. "And you? Have you found any?" He hesitated. "Not yet. I've built a lot of things, but peace, that's harder." She studied him for a long moment. "Maybe peace isn't something you build, Daniel. Maybe it's something you allow." He nodded slowly. "Maybe I needed to hear that." After a while, they walked along the beach. The tide was low, and the air smelled of salt and seaweed. Grace pulled her coat tighter. "You shouldn't have come all this way." "I didn't come to bring you back," Daniel said. "I came to say thank you for the letter, for reminding me who I wanted to be." Her expression softened. "And who is that man who listens more than he talks, who acts without expecting applause?" He paused. "Someone who remembers that the world isn't his to fix alone." Grace smiled faintly. "That sounds like a good start." They walked in silence for a few more steps before she added, "You know, the rumors didn't break me. They just showed me how strong I'd already become. Maybe that was their purpose." He looked at her, admiration in his eyes. "You have a way of finding meaning in things most people would just call pain. Maybe because pain taught me to listen," she said. A soft gust of wind swept across the beach. and Lily's laughter carried through the air as she chased the waves. Grace watched her daughter, then turned back to Daniel. "You should stay for dinner," she said. "Lily will never forgive me if I let you leave without tasting her soup." He chuckled. "I'd be honored." That evening, they ate by the fire. Homemade soup, fresh bread, and simple conversation. It was the kind of warmth that couldn't be bought or planned. When Daniel stood to leave, Grace handed him a small jar filled with sand and seashells. "For when you forget what calm feels like," she said. He smiled, accepting it. "You always know what people need." She looked at him, her voice quiet. "No, Daniel, I just pay attention." As he drove back that night, the rain began again, gentle, rhythmic, familiar, but it no longer felt cold. It felt cleansing. For the first time in years, Daniel Rhodes didn't dread tomorrow. He simply let the rain fall and thought of the ocean, the laughter of a child, and the letter that had found him when he needed it most. 2 months passed after Daniel's visit to the coast. The quiet had done him good, but the world outside didn't rest. Seattle's business district was restless again, rumors of restructuring within Rhodes Industries, whispers of board revolts, accusations that Daniel's moral reforms were financially reckless. The morning news carried the headline, "Investors Call for Leadership Change at Rhodes Group." Daniel read it over coffee in his study. The rain tapped gently against the window, like a metronome counting down to something inevitable. He folded the paper and exhaled. "So, it begins," he murmured. Evan entered a few moments later, his expression serious. "They're calling an emergency board meeting this afternoon. Half the board believes your focus on the foundation is undermining the company's core profits." Daniel looked up. "They mean it's undermining their bonuses." Evan hesitated. "Yes, sir." For a moment, Daniel said nothing. He stood, walked to the window, and looked out over the gray city that had been both his kingdom and his cage. "If this is the cost of doing the right thing," he said finally, "then I'm ready to pay it." Evan studied him. "You could fight back, use your majority shares to shut them down." Daniel shook his head. "Power without purpose is just noise. If they're going to challenge me, I'll let them see who I've become." That afternoon, the boardroom filled with familiar faces, men and women in expensive suits, people who had once admired his ruthlessness and now doubted his heart. Daniel entered without a word, his presence quiet but commanding. He placed a folder on the table. "Before we begin, I'd like you to read the quarterly report for the Dignity Project." Colin's replacement, a sharp-tongued woman named Marjorie, scoffed. "We're not here to discuss charity, Daniel. We're here to talk about leadership. Investors are nervous. Profits are down 12%. Your reallocation of company funds has consequences." Daniel met her gaze. "And our worker retention rate is up 30%. Employee injuries are down nearly half. Productivity has never been stronger. Maybe the problem isn't compassion. It's that compassion doesn't fit your definition of success." The room murmured. Another executive leaned forward. "No one's questioning your heart, Daniel, but the company has shareholders. You can't save the world and run a business at the same time." Daniel's tone was calm. "I'm not trying to save the world. I'm trying to save us from becoming the kind of company that destroys the world in pieces." A long silence followed. Then Marjorie said sharply, "If you continue this path, the board will have no choice but to vote on your removal as CEO." Daniel straightened, his voice steady. "Then vote." The board exchanged uneasy glances. No one expected him to call their bluff so directly. After a tense few minutes, hands were raised 4 against, 3, 4. One abstained. Daniel was outnumbered. Evan, standing quietly near the door, clenched his fists. Marjorie spoke coldly. Effective immediately. The board has appointed interim leadership. You'll retain advisory status, but your executive power is suspended. Daniel nodded once. Very well. He gathered his folder, nodded to Evan, and walked out. There was no anger in his steps, only quiet resolve. Outside, the drizzle had turned into steady rain. He paused under the building's awning, looking up at the sky. The water traced across his face, cool and grounding. For the first time in years, losing power didn't feel like defeat. It felt like release. That evening, Daniel returned to the mansion. He packed a small suitcase, no suits, no documents, just a few clothes and the small jar of sand Grace had given him. As he zipped the bag, the doorbell rang. Evan stood there, holding an envelope. This came for you, postmarked from the coast. Daniel opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Grace's familiar handwriting once again. If you're reading this, something has ended. But endings aren't always losses. Sometimes they're just new beginnings in disguise. If you ever need a reminder of why you started all this, come back to the sea. The tide still remembers your footprints. No signature, just the quiet certainty of her words. Daniel smiled faintly. She always knows. The next morning, without announcement, he drove back to the coast. When he arrived, the sky was clear, a rare break in the Seattle gray. Grace was in the garden, trimming rosemary. She looked up, surprise flickering across her face before softening into a smile. I heard about the vote, she said. News travels fast. He replied, bad news always does. He laughed quietly. I lost the company. No, she said, setting down the shears. You just stopped belonging to it. Her words settled over him like sunlight. They walked along the beach as Lily ran ahead, chasing gulls. The air was crisp, the sea calm. Daniel watched the waves rolling in, their rhythm steady, endless. I thought I'd feel broken, he admitted. Instead, I feel free. That's because what you built wasn't the company, Grace said. It was the change inside you. They can't vote that away. He looked at her. You really believe people can change? I've seen it, she said simply. I'm looking at it. He smiled then, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low, Daniel sat by the fire in Grace's cottage while Lily played nearby. The light flickered across the room, casting warm shadows on the walls. Do you ever regret it? He asked softly. Leaving the foundation, she replied, No, it was necessary. But I don't regret what we built together. It mattered. It still does, he said. Even if no one knows it. They will, she said. Truth takes time to be seen, but it always finds light. He nodded slowly. Maybe that's what Amelia believed too. Grace looked at him curiously. Do you still talk to her? Sometimes, he said, smiling faintly, in the quiet. I think she'd like you. Grace chuckled softly. She sounds wise. She was. She believed in gentle revolutions. The fire crackled. Lily leaned against her mother's side, yawning. Grace brushed her hair back, then glanced at Daniel. You can stay tonight. You know, there's a guest room. Daniel hesitated, then nodded. Thank you. Outside, the waves rolled against the shore, steady as a heartbeat. For the first time in years, Daniel felt that he was exactly where he was meant to be, not as a billionaire, not as a savior, but simply as a man learning to live again. And in that small coastal cottage, with laughter, firelight, and the scent of rosemary filling the air, the storm that had followed him for so long finally began to break clear. Morning sunlight spilled softly over the coastline, cutting through the mist that lingered above the water. Grace stood outside her cottage, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, eyes following the waves as they folded and unfolded upon the sand. Behind her, she could hear Lily humming a tune, still half asleep, her voice soft and bright like a bird greeting the day. Daniel was already awake, sitting at the small wooden table by the window, papers spread before him. He wasn't wearing a suit, just a worn gray sweater and jeans, the kind of clothes that made him seem more human than powerful. Grace watched him for a moment before stepping inside. "Working already?" she asked. He looked up and smiled faintly. "Old habits die hard." She walked over, peering at the papers. "Are those from Rhodes Group?" He shook his head. "No. These are drafts for something new, something that's ours." "Ours," she repeated, curiosity flickering in her tone. "I've been thinking," Daniel said, tapping a page with his pen. "We don't need their boardrooms or investors to do good. We can build something smaller, real, local, a new version of the Dignity Project, community-led, transparent, independent." Grace studied his face. "You want to start over?" He nodded. "From the ground up? The right way this time, not as an extension of a company, but as a movement." For a moment, she said nothing. Then she smiled. "You sound like someone who's finally found his purpose." He met her gaze. "Maybe I just found the right people to build it with." Grace took the papers and read through them quietly. She could see the outlines of what he envisioned: training programs for unemployed workers, microloans for small businesses, mentorship for single parents, even a scholarship fund named after Amelia Rhodes. It wasn't grand in scale, but it was deeply human. "This could work," she said softly. "If it stays honest." "It will," Daniel said. "You'll make sure of that." She raised an eyebrow. "Oh, am I part of this plan now?" "You're the heart of it," he said simply. Grace felt something tighten in her chest, not discomfort, but the fragile warmth of being seen for her true worth. That afternoon, the three of them, Grace, Daniel, and Lily, walked into the small town's community center to meet a few locals. Daniel explained his vision for the project, expecting skepticism. Instead, what he found was quiet enthusiasm. A retired teacher offered to run literacy classes. A carpenter volunteered to help repair the building's old roof. Even the town librarian promised to donate used books. Watching the way people responded, Grace realized something profound. Daniel wasn't leading them as a billionaire anymore. He was leading as a man who listened. Over the next few weeks, the rhythm of life in the coastal town began to shift. Daniel spent his mornings in meetings with volunteers, his afternoons helping with repairs. Grace handled paperwork, outreach, and the thousand small details that made the dream tangible. Lily, ever curious, became the heart of the place painting signs, helping in the garden, handing out cookies to anyone who worked late. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, Grace found Daniel outside, sanding a piece of wood for a new bench. His hands were rough, flecked with sawdust. She leaned against the doorframe, smiling. "Never thought I'd see a billionaire doing carpentry," she teased. He looked up, eyes glinting with humor. "Don't tell the newspapers. They'd say I've gone mad." "Maybe you have," she said softly. "But it suits you." He chuckled. "You know, I used to think success was about leaving a mark on the world. Now I think it's about leaving the world a little lighter for someone else." Grace stepped closer, watching the last streaks of sunlight fade. "That's a lesson people spend lifetimes trying to learn. Maybe I just had the right teacher," he said. Their eyes met. For a long moment, neither spoke. There was no need to. The silence between them wasn't distance, it was connection. Later that night, the community center officially reopened. The hall was filled with laughter and music. Locals brought food, homemade pies, roasted vegetables, warm bread. Daniel stood near the doorway, watching it all unfold, a quiet pride blooming in his chest. Grace joined him, carrying 2 cups of cider. "Look at them," she said. "They made this their own." "That's the point," Daniel replied. "It belongs to them now." As the night went on, Lily tugged at Daniel's sleeve. "Come dance." "Mr. Rhodes," she said, her eyes bright. He laughed, shaking his head. "I don't think I remember how." Grace smiled. "Then it's time you relearned." And so he did. Awkwardly at first, but with laughter that came easier than it had in years. For the first time, Daniel Rhodes wasn't leading anyone or saving anyone. He was simply with them, part of something, not above it. When the music quieted and the crowd began to thin, Grace and Daniel stepped outside. The stars were bright, the sea whispering in the distance. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked quietly. "The power, the wealth, the control." He thought for a long moment before answering. "No," he said finally, "because I traded it for something I never had before." "What's that peace?" Grace smiled faintly. "It looks good on you." He turned to her, his voice low. "Grace, I don't know where all of this leads, but if there's a next chapter, I'd like you to be in it." She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "Maybe we've already started it." They stood there a while longer, the ocean breeze moving through the quiet night. Neither spoke again. Some things, they both knew, didn't need words. Weeks later, a letter arrived at the new community office, this time from Seattle. It was from a former Rhodes Industries employee, one who had been laid off before Daniel's reforms. The letter was simple but powerful. "Dear Mr. Rhodes and Miss Miller, I watched what you did. I saw how you left everything behind to build something honest. I wanted you to know it mattered. It reminded people like me that decency still has a place in this world. I found work again, but more importantly, I found hope. Thank you." Grace read it aloud to Daniel, her voice trembling slightly. When she finished, neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Daniel said quietly, "This is why we do it." Grace nodded, "And this is why we'll keep going." Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of the sea. The flags above the community center fluttered in the breeze, signs of renewal, of second chances, of a world quietly mending itself. The billionaire who once measured success in stock prices now measured it in smiles, in laughter, in letters from strangers who believed again. And Grace, who once ate alone in the rain, now stood beside someone who had learned how to see the world through her eyes. The wind was no longer a storm. It was a beginning. The first snow of the season dusted the rooftops of the coastal town, turning everything into quiet silver. The world seemed softer, slower, and for the first time in years, Daniel Rhodes found himself in sync with it. He'd traded boardrooms for classrooms, corporate reports for community ledgers, and restless ambition for a peace he hadn't known he needed. But peace rarely stayed untested. One morning, as Daniel was helping fix a leaky window at the community center, a black sedan pulled up outside. A man in a long coat stepped out, brushing the snow from his shoulders. Evan Blake. Daniel froze for a moment before smiling faintly. I should have known you'd find me. Evan grinned. You didn't exactly go into hiding, sir. You left a paper trail of kindness. Is that what they're calling it now? Some are, Evan said, handing him an envelope. Others, not so much. Daniel wiped his hands and opened the letter. It bore the official Rhodes Group seal. Inside, a formal message. The board has voted to reinstate Daniel Rhodes as CEO, effective immediately, pending acceptance. He read it twice, silent. Then he looked up at Evan. This is a joke. Evan shook his head. Marjorie resigned last week. The new investors want you back. They've realized the company's reputation is in free fall without you. They need your face, your story. Daniel's jaw tightened. They want redemption, not reform. Maybe, Evan admitted, but you'd have power again, real power to make lasting change. From the top. Grace entered the room just then, carrying a tray of cocoa for the volunteers. She noticed the expression on Daniel's face and the paper in his hand. What's that? He hesitated, then handed her the letter. She read it quietly, her expression unreadable. They want you back, she said softly. Yes. And you're thinking about it. He didn't deny it. I don't know. He admitted. Part of me feels like walking back into that building would erase everything I've learned here. But another part wonders if stepping away completely was cowardice. Grace set the tray down. You left because you chose people over power. Daniel, don't call that cowardice. But what if I could do more good from within, he asked. If I go back, I could redirect resources, rebuild the ethics programs, protect workers. Or you could get swallowed by the same system that broke you before. She interrupted gently. You can't fix a machine that refuses to see itself as broken. He met her eyes, and for a long moment, they just stood there, the air between them heavy with unspoken conflict. Evan cleared his throat softly. They need an answer within a week. Daniel nodded. Tell them I'll think about it. That night, sleep eluded him. He sat by the fire long after everyone else had gone to bed, staring at the letter on the table. The flames danced, shadows bending against the walls. For the first time since leaving Seattle, he felt torn again between what was right and what was expected. Grace found him there near midnight. She stood quietly for a while before saying, You're not a man who sleeps easily when a decision's unfinished. He smiled weakly. You know me too well. She walked closer, her tone calm but firm. You're afraid that walking away from power makes your change meaningless. But Daniel, the meaning isn't in where you stand. It's in how you stand. He looked up at her, his voice low. You really think I can't make a difference if I go back? She hesitated. I think you'd try. I just don't know if the cost would be worth it. Her words sank deep, not as accusation, but as truth. The next morning, Daniel walked to the cliffs overlooking the sea. The wind bit at his face, cold and sharp, but it cleared his thoughts. Below, the waves crashed endlessly destructive and renewing all at once. He closed his eyes and remembered Amelia's voice from long ago. You can't serve two masters. Daniel, you either chase power or you protect people, but not both. When he returned to the cottage, Grace and Lily were at the table drawing. Lily looked up brightly. Mr. Rhodes, look, I made you something. She held out a small clay sculpture, a tiny house with a tree beside it. It's for the new community place, she said proudly. Daniel knelt beside her. It's beautiful. Lily, what's the tree for? So people have somewhere to sit when they're tired, she said simply. Everyone needs a place to rest. Her words struck something deep inside him. Everyone needed a place to rest. That evening, Daniel called Evan. Tell them no, he said simply. Evan paused. Are you sure? Sir, this might be your last chance to take the company back. Daniel smiled softly. I don't need it back. I have something better. When he hung up, Grace was standing by the doorway. You made your choice, she said. Yes, he replied. And for once, it feels like the right one. She smiled faintly. So what now? He looked around the small cottage, at the papers scattered on the desk, at Lily humming by the fire. Now, he said, we build something that doesn't need headlines to matter. Over the next few days, Daniel and Grace worked harder than ever. Word of their new project spread beyond the coastal town. Neighbors from nearby communities began visiting, asking how they could start similar programs. Soon, local journalists picked up the story. One headline read, Former billionaire turns down power to empower others. When Daniel saw it, he laughed quietly. I guess they finally found a headline worth printing. Grace smiled, and it only took a few storms to get there. A month later, the community center held its first regional summit. Leaders from small towns gathered to share ideas about sustainable growth, fair labor, and compassionate leadership. Daniel stood before them. No microphone, no stage lights, just a circle of people sitting together. He spoke from the heart. We all think change has to start with power, but it doesn't. It starts with presence, with choosing to see each other as more than numbers, titles, or statistics. The moment we start seeing people as human again, that's when change begins. The room was silent, then filled with applause, not the loud, empty kind of corporate events, but warm, human appreciation. Later that evening, as the crowd dispersed, Grace found him standing by the window, watching the sunset turn the sky to gold. You did well, she said softly. He turned to her, smiling. We did well. She nodded. You know, Amelia would be proud of you. He looked out at the horizon, his voice quiet. Maybe she's proud of us. Outside. The wind picked up again, but it wasn't harsh. It was gentle, carrying the scent of salt and earth, whispering like an old friend returning after a long journey. Daniel Rhodes closed his eyes, breathed in deeply, and finally, without hesitation, let the past drift away. He had made his choice, and this time, the change was not in the world, it was in him. Spring came early that year. The coastal air was warmer, the sea calmer, and the scent of blooming jasmine drifted through the narrow streets of the little town. The world seemed softer, lighter, as if it too had shed something heavy during the long winter. Daniel Rhodes stood on the small wooden porch of the new community center, watching as children painted a mural on the outer wall. Bright blues and yellows swirled together, hands, waves, and trees all woven into one image. At the center, a quote written in careful letters, "Kindness is the quiet revolution." It had been 6 months since he turned down the offer to return as CEO. 6 months since he'd chosen simplicity over status. The Coastal Project had flourished in that time. What began as one small center now connected dozens of communities across the state. They shared resources, supported local workers, and built networks of compassion instead of competition. Grace had become the heart of it all, her calm leadership and practical wisdom earning her respect from everyone she met. People came to her for advice, for comfort, for direction. Lily was growing too, helping with the community garden, her laughter echoing across the open fields. For Daniel, Life had settled into a rhythm he'd never known: peaceful, unhurried, meaningful. But sometimes, late at night, when the house was quiet, he still thought about the man he had been, the one driven by profit and control. And he wondered if that version of him was truly gone, or simply sleeping. One afternoon, Grace found him by the pier, staring at the horizon where the sky met the sea. "Penny for your thoughts," she said, her voice light but knowing. He smiled faintly. "You'd be overpaying." "Try me?" He hesitated, then said softly, "I keep thinking about what comes next. We've built something good here, but good things have a way of fading. I want to make sure it lasts." Grace leaned against the railing beside him. "You're worried about legacy." "I guess I am," he admitted. "Maybe that's just ego wearing a nicer suit." She smiled gently. "No, wanting things to last isn't ego, it's hope. But the truth is, nothing truly lasts. Daniel, what matters is that it changes people while it's here." He looked at her, studying her profile against the sunset. "You always know how to turn my fears into something softer." "That's because I've had practice," she said, smiling, "mostly with myself." A comfortable silence settled between them. The waves lapped against the pier. Seagulls cried overhead. For a moment, everything felt still complete. That night, a storm rolled in from the ocean. The sky cracked open with thunder, and rain swept through the town in sheets. It was the heaviest downpour they'd seen all year. Grace and Lily ran through the center, closing windows, gathering blankets. Daniel helped move supplies away from the doors as water pooled at the edges. Outside, volunteers rushed to secure the garden and storage sheds. The rain came relentless, hammering against the roof, drenching the earth. "Are you all right?" Daniel shouted over the wind. Grace nodded, her hair plastered to her face. "It's just rain. We've seen worse." But as she spoke, lightning struck near the beach, igniting a small fire in the brush. Without hesitation, Daniel grabbed a coat and ran toward it. "Daniel, wait," Grace called, but he was already gone. The wind howled, rain slicing sideways. Daniel reached the flames and began beating them down with a soaked tarp. Other townsfolk soon joined, passing buckets, working together until the fire hissed and died. By the time they finished, everyone was soaked through, shivering but safe. When Daniel turned back, Grace was there, standing at the edge of the shore, watching him. Relief and anger flickered across her face in equal measure. "You could have been hurt," she said when he reached her. "So could everyone else." He replied simply. Her expression softened. "You never stop, do you?" He smiled faintly. "Maybe that's who I am now." By morning, the storm had passed. The sun broke through the clouds, scattering light across the soaked earth. The air smelled clean, like renewal. The garden had survived. The building stood strong. The only trace of the night before was the glistening water pooled in the fields. Daniel walked through the mud, his shoes sinking slightly with each step. Grace followed beside him, holding Lily's hand. "Funny," she said, "how storms make everything look sharper after they leave." Daniel nodded. "Maybe that's why they exist, to make us notice what's still standing." They stopped by the mural. The rain had washed away part of the paint, leaving smudged streaks across the lower corner. Lily frowned. "It's ruined," she said softly. Grace knelt beside her. "No, sweetheart, it's changed. Look closer, the colors mixed. Made something new." Daniel crouched too, studying the smears of paint that had turned into new shades of green and gold. "She's right," he said. Sometimes beauty needs a bit of chaos. Lily smiled faintly, like the rain helped it grow. Exactly, he said. Like the rain. That evening, the town gathered at the center for a small celebration part. Relief, part gratitude. The air was filled with laughter, the smell of fresh bread, the sound of guitars. Daniel stood near the back, watching people talk and dance. Grace approached him, holding 2 mugs of tea. "You've gone quiet," she said, handing him one. "I'm just watching," he said, trying to remember this. "It feels like something worth keeping." She nodded. "You can't keep moments, Daniel. You can only live them fully." He looked at her, his voice gentle. "Then I'm living this one." Grace smiled, and for a moment, the noise around them seemed to fade. The light flickered against her face, warm and golden. Outside, the last of the rain fell in a fine mist. It clung to the windows, glittering like tiny stars. Daniel stepped out into it, lifting his face to the sky. Grace followed, standing beside him. "Still can't stay out of the rain." "Can you?" she teased softly. He chuckled. "Maybe I just learned to stop running from it." They stood there in silence, the drizzle soft against their skin. Around them, the town glowed with life lights in windows, laughter spilling into the night, the scent of rain mingling with sea air. Grace looked up at him. "You know," she said, "when I first met you, I never thought we'd end up here." "Neither did I," he said quietly. "But I think Amelia did." Grace turned to him, eyes soft. "You still talk to her. Every day," he said. "Not with words, just in the quiet." She smiled. "Then tell her she'd be proud." He looked at her for a long time, and something unspoken passed between them, something that didn't need defining. In that moment, the rain slowed, then stopped entirely. The clouds parted, revealing a stretch of sky scattered with stars. The air shimmered with the scent of renewal. Daniel took a deep breath. For the first time, he realized there was nothing left to fix, nothing left to chase. Just life simple, imperfect, beautiful. The last rain had fallen, and in its wake, something new had begun. Billionaire sees his maid. Eating in the Rain is more than a story about a billionaire and his maid. It's a journey of a person finding himself again, through empathy, gratitude, and the courage to let go of power and choose what is right. From Grace, we learn that dignity does not come from status, but from how we face life's challenges. From Daniel, we understand that no matter how much wealth one has, an empty heart is the poorest state of all. And from Lily, small and innocent, we are reminded that sometimes the greatest lessons come from simple acts of kindness and purity. The story delivers a message to everyone. Don't let busyness blind you to the people around you. A kind word, a small gesture, or even a single glance can sometimes heal a soul or even awaken your own heart. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If this story made you smile, brought a tear to your eye, or simply made you pause and reflect, please like, share, and subscribe to help spread more stories of kindness and humanity.